morning. Welcome again to Morning Devotions. Thank you again for our time together. Please don't forget, next weekend is Never Claim. We'd invite all of you to come. It's going to be an incredible night of worship. And I had to be honest with you, this is one of my favorite worship bands right now. This is the band of a local church that God has just blessed with tremendous music. It's going to be a great weekend of worship. We invite you to come. If you don't have a home church, come. Be a part. We'd love to get to know you. Walk up and shake our hands and introduce yourself. Right now, I want to take you back to the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 15, verse 13. And I'm reading from New Century Version, or New Living Version, all this year. Jesus replied, "Every plant not planted by my Father will be rooted up, so ignore them. They are blind guides leading the blind, and if one blind person guides another, they will both fall into the ditch." Now notice, Jesus said, disciples, don't get upset by a lot of this religious stuff that goes on around you. Ignore it. Why? Because every plant that has not been planted by my Father will be rooted up. Now, we need to realize that in the world today, there are local churches, there are religious movements, there are preachers, there are a lot of things that people do in the name of God that are, as I taught you in an earlier study, unauthorized. They weren't planted by God. They were planted by the will of man, but they weren't planted by the will of God. And if you and I, as Christians, would just learn to not be upset by these things, not be upset and offended by the things that they do and they say, ignore them. Keep focused on the harvest field. Keep focused on getting people born again. Keep focused on bringing people into the kingdom of God. And don't worry about these false prophets. Don't worry about these, forgive me, self-called, self-proclaimed, self-built churches and religious movements. Don't worry about them. Jesus said, every planting that is not of my Father will be rooted up. I've had the privilege of being the pastor of COP for 38, coming up on 39 years. I've watched so many things that were so irritating when I was young. But when I look back, they're all gone now. Churches, religious movements, doctrines, and these things look so huge and so upsetting in those days. But you know what I found? They're like mushrooms. They grow up quickly, but because they weren't planted of the Lord, they don't last. Now let me just end with this thought. Pastors, before you start a church, make sure this is something God said, that you don't belong on the staff of another church, that you're really going out to build this church because God spoke to you. Success is not a validation of God. You know, there's many people that are successful because they follow certain patterns that are successful. But longevity shows that you're a planting of God.